The sun was setting behind the Rocky Mountains of Afghanistan when Lieutenant Sarah Martinez received the emergency radio call that would change everything. She was sitting in her M1 Abrams tank at Forward Operating Base Chapman, cleaning her rifle and writing a letter to her younger brother back home in Texas. The static crackled through her headset, and then came the voice she recognized immediately, Commander Jake Morrison from SEAL Team 6. Tank 1, this is Eagle Nest. We have a problem. Big problem. His voice was tight, controlled, but Sarah could hear the tension underneath. She had worked with Morrison's team before during joint operations, and she knew he wasn't the type to panic easily. Sarah grabbed her radio and responded quickly. Eagle Nest, this is Tank 1. What's your status? She was already moving, climbing into the driver's seat of her 68-ton war machine. Her crew, Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, Corporal Danny Kim, and Private First Class Alex Thompson, were scrambling to their positions around the tank. We're pinned down about 12 clicks northeast of your position. Intel was wrong. This wasn't supposed to be a hot zone, but we've got at least 40 hostiles with heavy weapons surrounding us in a valley. We came in light for a quick reconnaissance mission, but someone tipped them off. They're throwing everything they have at us. Sarah's heart started racing. 12 kilometers wasn't far, but the terrain between the base and their position was rough mountain country, with narrow passes and steep cliffs. She had studied every map of this region, memorized every trail and valley. The area Morrison was describing was known locally as the Devil's Bowl, a natural amphitheater surrounded by high ground on all sides. It was a perfect place for an ambush. How many of you are there? Sarah asked while checking her ammunition count and fuel levels. The Abrams was ready for action, fully loaded with 120 mm rounds and thousands of rounds for the machine guns. 6 of us made it to cover behind some rocks in the center of the valley. Thompson is hit bad in the leg, and Martinez has shrapnel in his shoulder. We've been here for 3 hours and they're not letting up. They've got RPGs, heavy machine guns, and mortars. Every time we try to move, they light us up from 3 different directions. Sarah looked at her digital map display, plotting the fastest route to reach the trapped SEALs. The standard approach would take her through a winding mountain road that would add another hour to the journey. But there was another way, a more direct path that no tank had ever attempted. It meant driving straight up and over a steep ridge that most people thought was impossible for a vehicle as heavy as an Abrams. Eagle Nest, can you hold your position for 45 minutes? Sarah asked while strapping on her helmet and checking her communications equipment. We'll have to. We're running low on ammunition, and the enemy is moving closer. They know we can't stay here much longer. Sarah, I need you to know, if you can't make it, don't risk your crew. We knew the risks when we signed up for this. Sarah felt a surge of determination. She had grown up on a ranch in Texas, the daughter of a mechanic who taught her that machines were only as good as the people who operated them. She had joined the Army to prove that a woman could handle any job as well as any man. Now 6 of America's finest warriors were counting on her to do something that had never been done before. Rodriguez, Kim, Thompson. Listen up, Sarah called to her crew over the internal communications system. We've got 6 SEALs trapped in Devil's Bowl. The only way to reach them in time is to go over Razor Ridge directly. It's going to be rough and it's going to be dangerous. Anyone who wants to stay behind can do so with no questions asked. Rodriguez, her gunner, was a veteran of 2 previous deployments. He had served with tank crews since he was 18 years old, and at 32 he was one of the most experienced tank operators in the unit. Ma'am, with respect, those boys are counting on us. If this tank can make it over that ridge, we'll make it happen. Kim, the loader, was barely 21 but had proven himself in combat multiple times. He came from a family of soldiers. His father had served in Vietnam and his grandfather had fought in Korea. I'm in, Lieutenant. Let's go get our boys. Thompson, the youngest member of the crew at 19, was nervous but determined. This was his first deployment, and he had been eager to prove himself worthy of serving alongside more experienced soldiers. Whatever it takes, ma'am. I didn't come here to play it safe. Sarah felt a wave of pride in her crew. These men trusted her judgment completely, even when it meant attempting something that could easily get them all killed. She started the massive diesel engine, and the Abrams roared to life with its distinctive deep rumble that could be heard from miles away. As they rolled out of the base, Sarah radioed back to Morrison. Eagle Nest, Tank 1 is en route. We're taking the direct approach over Razor Ridge. ETA is 45 minutes if everything goes according to plan. Roger that, Tank 1. And Sarah, thank you. We owe you one. Sarah smiled grimly as she guided the 68-ton monster toward the mountains. Just stay alive long enough for us to collect on that debt, Morrison. The Abrams picked up speed as it left the paved roads of the base and started climbing into the rocky terrain. Behind them, the lights of the forward operating base grew smaller and smaller. Ahead of them lay 12 kilometers of the most challenging terrain any tank crew had ever attempted to navigate. But somewhere in that terrain, 6 American warriors were fighting for their lives, and Sarah Martinez was determined not to let them down. The radio crackled with distant gunfire and explosions as Morrison's team continued to fight off their attackers. Time was running out and the real test was just beginning. The M1 Abrams climbed steadily up the mountain trail, its powerful turbine engine working harder with each passing minute. Sarah kept her eyes focused on the terrain ahead, while listening to the radio chatter from Morrison's team. The gunfire was getting more intense, and she could hear the stress in the SEAL commander's voice as he coordinated his men's defensive positions. Contact left. Kim, give me suppressing fire on that ridgeline. Morrison's voice crackled through the radio, followed by the distinctive sound of automatic weapons fire and explosions. Sarah gripped the steering controls tighter and pushed the tank's speed as fast as she dared on the narrow mountain path. Rocks and loose gravel scattered under the massive tracks, and several times she had to back up and find a different route around boulders that were too large to crush or push aside. Lieutenant, we're approaching the base of Razor Ridge, Rodriguez called out from his gunner's position. He was studying the terrain through his periscope, calculating angles and distances. I can see the path you're talking about, but ma'am, it's steep. Real steep. We're talking about a 60-degree incline in some places. Sarah had studied the satellite photos of this ridge dozens of times, but seeing it in person was different. The slope looked almost vertical from their current position, covered with loose rocks and patches of ice from the cold mountain air. No wheeled vehicle could possibly make this climb, and even tracked vehicles like their tank had never attempted anything this extreme. Rodriguez, what's our ammunition status? Sarah asked while shifting the transmission into the lowest gear ratio available. Full load, ma'am. 42 rounds of 120 millimeters, plus 3,000 rounds of 7.62 and 800 rounds of 50 caliber for the machine guns. We're carrying maximum weight. The additional weight of a full ammunition load would make the climb even more difficult, but Sarah knew they would need every round when they reached the valley where the SEALs were trapped. Intelligence reports suggested the enemy force was much larger than originally estimated, and they would be fighting from elevated positions with good cover. Kim, Thompson, secure everything inside that can move, Sarah ordered. We're about to put this tank through something it was never designed to do. The 2 younger crew members quickly checked all their equipment, making sure nothing would come loose during the extreme climb ahead. Loose objects inside a tank could become deadly. Projectiles when the vehicle tilted at sharp angles. Sarah engaged the track locks and began the ascent up Razor Ridge. The Abrams immediately tilted backward at a sharp angle, and she could hear loose rocks and gravel cascading down the slope behind them. The engine roared louder as it fought against gravity and the massive weight of the tank. Tank 1, this is Eagle Nest. Morrison's voice came through the radio again. What's your ETA? The situation here is getting worse. They're bringing up mortars and we've got movement on our flanks. I think they're trying to surround us completely. Sarah checked her GPS display and calculated their remaining distance. Eagle Nest, we're climbing Razor Ridge now. 25 minutes if we don't break anything on the way up. 25 minutes, Morrison repeated. Copy that. We'll hold. The tank continued its climb, tracks gripping the rocky surface and finding purchase on ledges that seemed impossibly narrow. Several times Sarah felt the rear of the tank slide sideways as loose rocks gave way under their weight, but the sophisticated suspension system kept them moving forward. Halfway up the ridge, they encountered their first major obstacle. A massive boulder at least 12 feet tall and 8 feet wide blocked the path directly ahead. There was no way around it. The ridge was too narrow and the drop-offs on either side were too steep. We're going to have to go through it, Sarah announced to her crew. Through it? Thompson asked nervously. Ma'am, that rock has to weigh at least 20 tons. And we weigh 68 tons, Sarah replied calmly. Plus we've got 500 horsepower and the momentum of this climb behind us. She backed the tank down about 50 feet to get a running start, then accelerated up the slope toward the boulder. The impact was tremendous. The entire tank shook violently and the sound of crushing rock echoed across the mountain valley. But the Abrams pushed through, grinding the boulder into smaller pieces and shoving the debris out of the way. Holy cow, Thompson breathed. I can't believe that actually worked. Neither can I, Sarah admitted with a grin. But don't tell anyone I said that. The radio crackled again with urgent voices. Tank 1, we just lost our primary radio. Switching to backup frequency. The enemy is massing for a major assault. We've counted at least 60 fighters moving into position around our perimeter. 60 fighters was more than Morrison had originally estimated. Sarah realized that her tank crew would be facing overwhelming odds even after they reached the valley. But backing down wasn't an option. Not when American lives were at stake. The slope became even steeper as they approached the crest of Razor Ridge. The I tank was now tilted at such an extreme angle that Sarah had to brace herself against the driver's controls to keep from sliding backward. The engine was running at maximum power, and she could hear the transmission straining under the load. Rodriguez, can you see the valley yet? Sarah asked. Negative, ma'am. Still climbing, but I can hear the gunfire getting louder. We're definitely getting closer. Suddenly, the left track hit a patch of loose shale, and the rear of the tank began sliding sideways toward the edge of the ridge. Sarah felt her stomach drop as she realized they were sliding toward a cliff that dropped straight down for hundreds of feet. Everyone hold on, she shouted, turning the steering controls hard to the right and gunning the engine. The right track dug into more solid rock and stopped their slide just feet from the edge. For a moment, the only sound inside the tank was heavy breathing from all 4 crew members. Then Rodriguez spoke up. Ma'am, remind me to never doubt your driving skills again. Sarah wiped sweat from her forehead and continued the climb. The crest of the ridge was finally visible ahead of them, silhouetted against the darkening sky. Beyond that ridge lay Devil's Bowl, where 6 American warriors were fighting for their lives against impossible odds. Almost there, boys, Sarah announced. Get ready for the fight of our lives. The M1 Abrams finally crested Razor Ridge, and Sarah got her first clear view of Devil's Bowl spread out below them. The natural amphitheater was exactly as she had imagined from studying the maps. A circular valley about half a mile across, surrounded by steep walls of rock and scrubby vegetation. But what the maps hadn't shown was the sheer number of enemy fighters positioned around the rim of the bowl. Jesus Christ, Rodriguez whispered as he surveyed the scene through his gunner's sight. There's got to be 80 of them, maybe more. They've got the whole valley surrounded. Sarah could see muzzle flashes from dozens of weapons firing down into the center of the valley, where Morrison's SEAL team had taken cover behind a cluster of large boulders. The enemy had positioned machine gun nests, mortar crews and riflemen at intervals around the entire perimeter of the bowl. It was a textbook ambush setup and the SEALs were completely trapped. Tank 1, thank God you made it. Morrison's voice came through the radio, barely audible over the sound of gunfire. We can see you on the ridge. The situation down here is critical. Martinez is unconscious from blood loss, and we're down to our last magazines. Sarah studied the terrain between their position on the ridge and the valley floor. The descent would be almost as treacherous as the climb up had been, but at least gravity would be working with them instead of against them. The real problem would be dealing with all those enemy positions while protecting the trapped SEALs. Rodriguez, I need target priorities, Sarah ordered while beginning the careful descent into the valley. Kim, get ready to load high explosive rounds. We're going to clear a path. I count 12 heavy weapon positions around the rim, Rodriguez reported, tracking targets through his thermal imaging sight, plus at least 40 riflemen in smaller groups. They've got us outnumbered, but they don't know we're here yet. Sarah smiled grimly. The enemy fighters were so focused on the SEALs in the center of the valley that none of them had noticed the 68-ton tank approaching from the ridge behind them. That element of surprise would only last for a few more seconds, but it might be enough to tip the odds in their favor. Thompson, get on the .50 caliber machine gun, Sarah instructed the youngest crew member. Kim, you'll handle the 7.62 coaxial gun. Rodriguez, you take the main cannon. I want overlapping fields of fire covering the whole valley. The tank continued its descent, tracks gripping the loose rock and maintaining control despite the steep angle. Sarah had to use every bit of skill she had learned during years of training to keep them from sliding or rolling over. When they were about halfway down the slope, one of the enemy fighters finally spotted them. The man shouted a warning in a language Sarah didn't recognize, and suddenly dozens of weapons turned toward the approaching tank. Light them up, Sarah ordered. Rodriguez fired the first shot from the 120 mm main gun, sending a high explosive round into the largest enemy position on the far side of the valley. The explosion was tremendous, silencing an entire machine gun nest and sending debris flying in all directions. Kim opened fire with the coaxial machine gun, sweeping back and forth across enemy positions and forcing the fighters to take cover. Thompson added his firepower with the .50 caliber gun, targeting individual enemies who were trying to get better shooting positions. The enemy fighters were caught completely off guard by the sudden appearance of an American tank in what they had considered an impossible position. Many of them had been sitting in the open, confident that their elevated positions made them safe from ground attack. But their surprise quickly turned to anger, and return fire began pouring toward the Abrams from multiple directions. Rifle bullets bounced harmlessly off the tank's heavy armor, but Sarah could hear the distinctive whoosh of rocket-propelled grenades being fired at them. "RPG incoming, 2 o'clock, Rodriguez shouted. Sarah jerked the tank hard to the left, and the rocket-propelled grenade exploded against the rocks where they had been positioned just seconds before. Chunks of stone and metal fragments rattled against the tank's armor, but caused no damage. The Abrams continued its descent while maintaining continuous fire on enemy positions. Rodriguez was working methodically around the rim of the valley, using the main gun to destroy the heaviest weapon emplacements, while Kim and Thompson suppressed the smaller groups with machine gun fire. Eagle Nest. "This is Tank 1, Sarah called over the radio. "We're engaging targets around your perimeter. Can you give us direction on your exact position? I don't want any friendly fire incidents." Tank 1, we're in the cluster of large rocks directly in the center of the bowl, about 50 meters from a small stream that runs north to south. We're popping yellow smoke now to mark our position. Sarah could see the bright yellow smoke grenade through her periscope, marking the SEAL's location clearly. She adjusted her team's fire accordingly, making sure all their shots were directed away from the friendly forces. The tank reached the valley floor and immediately came under heavier fire from the remaining enemy positions. Sarah could hear machine gun bullets pinging off their armor, and more RPGs were being launched at them from multiple directions. "Rodriguez, target that mortar crew at 10 o'clock, Sarah ordered. "They're getting the range on the SEAL's position." The main gun boomed again and another enemy position disappeared in a cloud of smoke and debris. But even as they eliminated threats, Sarah could see more enemy fighters moving into the valley from the surrounding mountains. What had started as an ambush of 6 SEALs was turning into a major battle. "Ma'am, we've got movement on the ridge behind us," Thompson reported. "Looks like they're trying to cut off our escape route." Sarah glanced at her tactical display and realized their situation was becoming more precarious by the minute. They had succeeded in reaching the trapped SEALs, but now they were potentially trapped themselves in the same valley that had become a death trap for Morrison's team. "One problem at a time," Sarah said calmly. "First, we get those SEALs out of here. Then we worry about our own exit strategy." The battle for Devil's Bowl was just getting started, and Sarah knew the hardest part was still ahead of them. The M1 Abrams thundered across the valley floor, its massive tracks crushing rocks and small boulders as Sarah maneuvered toward the SEAL's position. Enemy fire was coming from every direction now, but the tank's armor was holding up against everything except the largest explosives. "Tank 1, we can see you approaching," Morrison's voice came through the radio. "Martinez is in bad shape. We need immediate medical evacuation and we can't move him far." Sarah realized they would have to load the wounded SEAL directly onto the tank, something that had never been attempted in combat conditions. The Abrams wasn't designed to carry passengers, but desperate times called for creative solutions. "Rodriguez, keep suppressing those positions on the north ridge," Sarah ordered. "Kim, Thompson, get ready to open the hatches." "We're taking on passengers, ma'am. Are you sure about this?" Thompson asked nervously. "There's not exactly room for guests in here." "We'll make room," Sarah replied firmly. "Those men didn't come this far to die in a valley in Afghanistan." The tank pulled up next to the cluster of boulders where the SEALs had taken cover. Sarah could see the 6 men clearly now. 5 of them were still fighting, moving between rocks and returning fire at enemy positions, while one lay motionless on a stretcher they had improvised from gear. Morrison appeared at Sarah's driver's hatch, his face streaked with dirt and sweat. "Sarah, thank God you made it. I wasn't sure anyone could get down that ridge. Just call me crazy," Sarah replied with a grin. "How's your wounded man?" "Martinez has lost a lot of blood, but he's stable for now. Thompson has shrapnel in his shoulder, but he can still fight. The other 4 of us are operational, just low on ammunition." All right, here's the plan, Sarah said quickly while Rodriguez continued to engage targets around the valley rim. Your wounded man rides on the engine deck. 2 of your men can squeeze into the tank with us and the other 3 ride on the outside. It's going to be rough, but it's better than staying here. Morrison nodded grimly. Whatever it takes. But Sarah, you should know we've got more company coming. I can hear vehicles approaching from the east. Sounds like reinforcements for the bad guys. As if to confirm his words, the distinctive sound of diesel engines and grinding gears echoed across the valley. Sarah looked through her periscope and saw dust clouds rising from the eastern entrance to Devil's Bowl. At least 3 military trucks were approaching, loaded with additional enemy fighters. Well, this just keeps getting better, Sarah muttered. All right, let's move fast. Get your people loaded up. The next few minutes were controlled chaos as the SEALs climbed onto and into the Abrams while the tank crew continued to fight off attackers. The wounded SEAL was carefully strapped to the engine deck using cargo tie-downs, while 2 of the healthier team members squeezed into the tank's cramped interior. The remaining 3 SEALs positioned themselves on the tank's exterior, using whatever handholds they could find. Everyone aboard? Sarah called out. Ready to move, Morrison confirmed from his position on the tank's rear deck. Sarah began turning the massive vehicle toward the valley's western exit, the route that would take them away from the approaching enemy reinforcements. But as they started to move, Rodriguez spotted a new problem. Ma'am, we've got technical vehicles moving to block the western exit. Looks like they're setting up a roadblock with machine guns. Technical vehicles, civilian trucks and SUVs modified with heavy weapons, were a common sight in this part of Afghanistan. They were fast and maneuverable, and while they couldn't match the firepower of a main battle tank, they could certainly make life difficult for a slow-moving vehicle trying to climb out of the valley. How many? Sarah asked while calculating distances and angles of approach. I count 4 vehicles, maybe 5. They've got heavy machine guns and what looks like a recoilless rifle mounted on one of them. A recoilless rifle could potentially damage the Abrams if it scored a direct hit in the right spot. Sarah knew they needed to deal with that threat quickly before it could be brought to bear on their position. Thompson, Kim, concentrate your machine gun fire on those technical vehicles, Sarah ordered. Rodriguez, save the main gun rounds for the hardest targets. The Abrams accelerated toward the western exit, carrying its unusual cargo of Navy SEALs while engaging multiple enemy positions simultaneously. The tank's sophisticated fire control systems allowed the crew to track and engage several targets at once, but Sarah knew they were running low on ammunition after the sustained firefight. Ammunition report, Sarah called out. 28 rounds of 120 milliliters remaining, Rodriguez reported. About 2,000 rounds of 7.62 and 600 rounds of 50 caliber. That wasn't much for the kind of running battle they were facing, especially if the enemy reinforcements arrived before they could escape the valley. Sarah pushed the accelerator harder, coaxing every bit of speed she could from the heavy tank. The technical vehicles at the valley exit opened fire as the Abrams approached, sending streams of machine gun bullets and rocket-propelled grenades toward the American tank. Most of the rounds bounced harmlessly off the armor, but Sarah could hear the SEALs on the outside of the tank taking cover and returning fire with their own weapons. Contact front, Morrison shouted from the rear deck.
I can see muzzle flashes from the rocks above the exit.
Sarah realized the enemy had positioned fighters on both sides of the narrow valley exit, creating a crossfire zone that would catch them in a deadly trap. But there was no other way out. They would have to fight their way through. Hold on, everyone, Sarah announced. This is going to get rough. She aimed the Abrams directly at the largest technical vehicle, the one mounting the recoilless rifle, and opened the throttle completely. 68 tons of American steel thundered toward the enemy position at maximum speed, with Navy SEALs hanging on wherever they could find a grip. The recoilless rifle fired just as Sarah swerved hard to the left. The shell exploded against the rocks beside them, showering the tank with stone fragments but causing no serious damage. Rodriguez returned fire with the main gun, and the technical vehicle disappeared in a ball of orange flame and black smoke. But as they broke through the roadblock and started climbing out of Devil's Bowl, Sarah could see in her mirrors that the enemy reinforcements had finally arrived in the valley behind them. Fresh fighters were pouring out of the trucks and taking up positions to pursue the escaping Americans. The real test was just beginning. Getting into Devil's Bowl had been dangerous, but getting out alive with 6 SEALs aboard was going to require every bit of skill and luck they could muster. The M1 Abrams climbed steadily up the narrow path leading out of Devil's Bowl. but Sarah could hear the growing sound of pursuit behind them. The enemy reinforcements weren't giving up easily, and their lighter vehicles could move faster on the winding mountain trails than her 68-ton tank. "Ma'am, we've got company," Thompson called out from his machine gun position. "I count at least 6 technical vehicles following us up the trail." Sarah glanced at her rear camera display and saw the pursuing vehicles spread out in a long column, their mounted machine guns firing sporadically at the retreating Americans. The enemy fighters were keeping their distance for now, probably waiting for a better opportunity to attack when the terrain gave them an advantage. "How's Martinez doing back there?" Sarah asked Morrison over the radio. "Still unconscious but breathing," the SEAL commander replied from his position on the engine deck next to the wounded man. "But Sarah, we need to get him to medical attention soon. He's lost a lot of blood." Sarah checked her GPS display and calculated their distance to the forward operating base. Even if they could maintain their current speed, it would take at least an hour to reach safety. "That might be too long for the wounded SEAL. Rodriguez, what's our ammunition status?" Sarah asked. 22 rounds of main gun ammunition left, and we're getting low on machine gun rounds too. At this rate, we'll be empty before we reach the base. That was a problem Sarah hadn't fully considered. They had expended so much ammunition in the firefight at Devil's Bowl that they might not have enough left to fight their way home. She would have to be more selective about their targets and make every shot count. The trail ahead curved sharply around a rocky outcropping, and Sarah could see that the enemy had anticipated their route. Fresh muzzle flashes appeared from the rocks above them. More fighters had moved ahead to set up an ambush at the curve. "Ambush ahead," Sarah warned her crew and passengers. "Everyone hold on." Instead of slowing down for the curve, Sarah accelerated and aimed the tank directly at the steepest part of the slope. The Abrams left the trail entirely and began climbing straight up the rocky hillside, its tracks grinding against stone and finding purchase on ledges that seemed impossibly narrow. The enemy fighters above them were caught completely off guard by this maneuver. They had positioned themselves to fire down at vehicles following the trail, but now the American tank was climbing directly toward them from below. "Thompson, Kim, suppressing fire on the rocks above us," Sarah ordered while fighting to control the tank on the steep slope. The 2 machine gunners opened fire, sending streams of bullets toward the enemy positions and forcing the fighters to take cover. Meanwhile, Rodriguez used the main gun to target the largest concentration of enemies, his high explosive rounds sending rock fragments cascading down the hillside. "Sarah, that was brilliant," Morrison called out, "but I think we've got a bigger problem. Look behind us." Sarah checked her rear cameras and saw that the pursuing technical vehicles had split up. Half of them were still following the original trail, but the others had taken a different route and were trying to circle around ahead of the Americans. If they succeeded, the Abrams would be caught between 2 groups of enemies with nowhere to run. "Rodriguez, target those vehicles on the trail below us," Sarah ordered. "We need to thin out the pursuit before they box us in." The main gun boomed again, and one of the technical vehicles exploded in a ball of flame. The other pursuing vehicles scattered, taking cover behind rocks and continuing their pursuit at a more cautious distance. But the tank's ammunition situation was becoming critical. They were down to 18 rounds for the main gun, and the machine guns were running low as well. Sarah knew they couldn't sustain this kind of running battle much longer. "Ma'am, I've got an idea," Thompson called out. "What if we take the old mining road that runs along the ridgeline? It's longer, but it might throw off the pursuit." Sarah had studied that route on the maps, but it had been marked as impassable for heavy vehicles. The mining road had been abandoned for years, and there was no telling what condition it was in. But it might be their only chance to avoid the enemy forces that were trying to surround them. "Thompson, you're either a genius or you're going to get us all killed," Sarah replied. "But at this point, I'm willing to take that chance." She turned the tank toward the ridgeline, following what remained of the old mining road. The surface was rough and broken, with sections washed out by years of mountain storms, but it was still passable for a vehicle with the Abrams capabilities. The pursuing technical vehicles hesitated when they saw the Americans change direction. Several of them tried to follow, but their wheeled vehicles couldn't handle the rough terrain as well as the tracked tank. "It's working," Rodriguez reported. "We're losing some of the pursuit, but we've still got 3 vehicles staying with us and they're gaining ground." Sarah pushed the tank's speed as high as she dared on the broken road surface. The Abrams bounced and lurched over rocks and potholes, and she could hear the SEALs on the outside struggling to maintain their grip. "Everyone still with us?" Sarah called out. Barely, Morrison replied grimly. But Martinez is still breathing, and the rest of us are hanging on. The old mining road crested a ridge and began descending toward a narrow valley that Sarah recognized from her maps. If they could reach that valley, they would only be about 30 minutes from the forward operating base. But the pursuing technical vehicles were still closing the distance, and their machine guns were starting to find the range. Bullets began striking the rear of the tank with increasing frequency, and Sarah could hear the distinctive sound of armor-piercing rounds trying to penetrate their defenses. Most of them bounced off harmlessly, but she knew that enough hits in the right spots could eventually cause damage. "Rodriguez, we need to discourage those followers," Sarah said. "Can you get a shot at them?" "Negative, ma'am. The rear machine gun doesn't have a clear field of fire with all our passengers on the back deck." Sarah realized they were in a vulnerable position. The SEALs riding on the tank's exterior were preventing her crew from using all their defensive weapons. But there was no safe way to relocate the passengers during the running battle. Then she had an idea that was either brilliant or completely insane. The narrow valley ahead had a sharp turn where the road passed between two large rock formations. If she timed it perfectly, she might be able to use the terrain to their advantage. "Everyone hold on tight," Sarah announced. "I'm about to try something that's definitely not in the manual." Sarah guided the M1 Abrams toward the narrow turn between the rock formations, her plan forming in her mind as they approached. The three pursuing technical vehicles were about 200 meters behind them, close enough that their machine gun fire was becoming dangerously accurate. "What's the plan, Sarah?" Morrison called out from the engine deck. "Trust me," Sarah replied, then keyed her internal communications. "Rodriguez, as soon as we make this turn, I'm going to stop the tank and reverse direction. I want you ready with the main gun to take out those technical vehicles when they come around the corner." "Ma'am, are you suggesting we play chicken with 3 truckloads of enemy fighters?" Rodriguez asked. "That's exactly what I'm suggesting," Sarah confirmed. "They're expecting us to keep running. They won't be ready for us to turn and fight." The Abrams swept around the turn between the massive rock walls, and Sarah immediately slammed on the brakes and threw the transmission into reverse. The 68-ton tank came to a grinding halt, then began backing up toward the turn they had just navigated. "Everyone get ready," Sarah announced. "This is either going to work perfectly or get us all killed in the next 30 seconds. The first technical vehicle came around the corner at high speed. Its driver focused on following the American tank's tracks in the dirt. The enemy fighters in the truck bed were looking ahead, expecting to see their quarry still fleeing down the valley. Instead, they found themselves face to face with the business end of a 120mm cannon at point-blank range. Rodriguez didn't hesitate. The main gun fired with a tremendous boom that echoed off the rock walls, and the leading technical vehicle simply disintegrated. The explosion was so close that Sarah could feel the heat wave wash over their tank. The second enemy vehicle tried to brake and turn around, but it was moving too fast on the narrow road. The truck skidded sideways and rolled over, spilling fighters and weapons across the rocky ground. Those who survived the crash scrambled for cover behind the rocks, but they were now on foot and trapped in the narrow valley. The third technical vehicle managed to stop before entering the kill zone, and Sarah could see its crew arguing frantically about what to do next. After a few moments, the truck began backing up the way it had come, its crew apparently deciding that discretion was the better part of valor. "Target eliminated," Rodriguez reported with satisfaction. That should discourage the rest of them. Sarah turned the tank around and resumed their journey toward the forward operating base. But now they were traveling without pursuit for the first time since leaving Devil's Bowl. The surviving enemy fighters were either dead, wounded, or retreating, and the immediate threat had passed. "Morrison, how's Martinez doing back there?" Sarah asked as they picked up speed on the smoother road surface. "Still unconscious, but his pulse is stronger," the SEAL commander reported. "I think he's going to make it if we can get him to the medics soon." Sarah checked her GPS display and saw that they were only 15 minutes away from the base. The worst was behind them now, and she allowed herself to feel a moment of relief. They had accomplished something that most people would have said was impossible: driving a main battle tank over terrain that no tank had ever attempted, rescuing 6 trapped SEALs and fighting their way out against overwhelming odds. "Tank 1, this is base control," a voice crackled through the radio. "We've been monitoring your situation. Medical team is standing by at the gate for immediate casualty treatment. Base control, Tank 1. Sarah replied. We're inbound with 6 SEAL team members, 1 requiring immediate medical attention. ETA is 12 minutes. Copy that, Tank 1. And Sarah, Command wants you to know that your actions today are going to be written up for commendation. What you did was extraordinary. Sarah felt a flush of pride, but she also knew that the real heroes were the men who had been trapped in that valley, fighting against impossible odds until help arrived. And her crew, Rodriguez, Kim, and Thompson, had performed flawlessly under the most extreme conditions imaginable. Rodriguez, Kim, Thompson, Sarah called out over the internal communication system. I want you all to know that you performed like the professionals I knew you were today. Without your skills and courage, none of us would be going home. Ma'am, it was an honor to serve with you today, Rodriguez replied, speaking for the entire crew. I've been in tank units for 14 years and I've never seen anything like what you did on that ridge. As the forward operating base came into view ahead of them, Sarah reflected on the events of the day. When she had joined the army, some people had questioned whether a woman could handle the physical and mental demands of tank warfare. Today she had proven that courage and skill had nothing to do with gender, and everything to do with training, determination, and the willingness to risk everything for your fellow soldiers. The M1 Abrams rolled through the gates of Forward Operating Base Chapman, just as the sun was setting behind the mountains of Afghanistan. Medical personnel rushed out to meet them, carefully removing the wounded SEAL from the engine deck and rushing him to the field hospital. Morrison clasped Sarah's hand as she climbed out of the tank. Sarah, I don't know how to thank you. You saved our lives today. Just doing my job, Sarah replied with a tired smile. But next time you guys want to go sightseeing in Devil's Bowl, maybe give me a heads up first so I can pack more ammunition. Morrison laughed, the first genuine smile Sarah had seen from him all day. Deal. But Sarah, what you did today, driving that tank over Razor Ridge and into that valley, that's going to become legend. People are going to be talking about this for years. As the SEALs were led away for medical evaluation and debriefing, Sarah looked back at her battered but victorious Abrams tank. The armor showed scars from dozens of bullet impacts and shrapnel hits, but the mighty machine had brought them all home safely. Rodriguez appeared at her side, looking exhausted but proud. Ma'am, maintenance wants to know what we did to this tank today. They've never seen damage patterns like this. Sarah grinned and patted the tank's armored flank affectionately. Tell them we took it for a little drive in the mountains. Nothing this old girl couldn't handle. In the years that followed, the story of Lieutenant Sarah Martinez and her crew's rescue mission would indeed become legend within the military community. The official after-action report would describe it as an unprecedented example of tactical innovation, mechanical excellence, and personal courage under fire. But for Sarah, the real victory was simpler than that. 6 American warriors had gone home to their families instead of dying in a valley in Afghanistan. And that, she knew, made everything worth it.